I think that we've now got a pretty good idea of how React Router DOM works inside of our application, and we've also written out a pretty good amount of code to set up some initial idea around navigation. So we're now going to start to pivot our attention and focus on handling authentication inside of our app. In this video, we're going to have a general discussion on how we handle authentication in general for like any type of web application, and then we will very quickly start to talk about how we're going to work it specifically into a React and Redux application. So let's get to it. All right, so first off, the idea here is that inside of our header, we're going to have some button that says something like login with Google. To handle authentication, we're going to use Google's OAuth 2 authentication flow. I can almost guarantee you that you have gone through a OAuth flow before in your own experience. So anytime that you ever click on some button like login with Google or login with Facebook or login with LinkedIn, that is you going through a OAuth 2.0 flow. The pinnacle, or the very traditional screen that you see anytime that you go through a OAuth flow, is some window like this over here, something that says, hey, this application wants to know your email address or access your profile or whatever else it might be. And then you, as a user, can either accept or reject that request. So in this video, we're going to get a better idea of what OAuth really is and how the flow works. Let's get to it. All right, so in many applications that you've used, you've probably also seen email and password authentication. Even Google itself, when you sign into Google or Facebook, you have to use email and password authentication. With this very classic form of authentication over here, we generally store a record inside of some type of database, and that record is going to maintain the user's email address and their encrypted password. And so with email and password authentication, you essentially inside of your own application are maintaining a record of who each user is, and you have some very intricate and detailed information about each and every user. Anytime that a user tries to log in with email and password authentication, we're essentially going to take and compare the email's entered email and password with whatever is saved inside the database. And then a user is considered to be logged in to an application whenever they enter the correct email and password. So again, that is traditional email and password authentication. So let's kind of compare that kind of easier or more traditional sense of authentication with OAuth authentication, which is what you and I are going to use. So with OAuth authentication, a user is going to first authenticate with some outside service provider through email and password authentication means. And an outside service provider is any OAuth provider, such as Google or LinkedIn or Facebook, as very popular examples. Now with this flow, we are essentially getting a user to authorize our application to access their information stored on Google's or LinkedIn or Facebook servers. So this outside provider is going to essentially tell us some information about this user, such as their email, their name, or whatever other info you and I request. So we are really trusting this outside provider quite a bit to identify this user, and we are absolutely trusting this outside provider that they are telling us correct information here. A good analogy here is to imagine if you are running some type of like lottery operation. Like let's say you put a lottery together and someone comes through your door inside of your office and says, hey, I just won the lottery, I've got a winning ticket. If you are a lottery provider and you're running this lottery, chances are the first thing you want to do is make sure that this person is who they say they are, right? You want to make sure that they are so-and-so and that they actually won the lottery with that ticket in hand. And so you can either kind of take that person's identification, like maybe a driver's license or something like that, or if that person has some friend who will vouch for them, it would be like you trusting that friend to say, oh yes, this person is who they say they are. So with email and password authentication, that is like you collecting credentials on your own, like some identification for the user. Whereas with OAuth authentication, we are essentially trusting some friend of that person saying that they are who they say they are. Now with OAuth, it's really a kind of two-sided thing that we get with OAuth. With email and password authentication, this is solely about authentication. It is just about identifying a user and associating some information with them. But with OAuth, we actually get kind of two results out of this flow. On the one hand, we still get that same type of user identification inside of our application. So when a user goes through a OAuth flow, we get some information that says, oh yeah, this is Jane Doe, and this is their email address, and here is their picture or whatever it is. But with the OAuth flow, we also can request access to make actions on behalf of the user through that service provider. Now, classic examples of that would be like if we put together some application that wanted to manage a user's email account. like maybe filter their emails or try to read their emails, we would use a OAuth flow to get access to that user's email account. So OAuth is not only about authentication, it's also about letting our application get access to all that user's data on some outside service provider. Now, in our case, we are only concerned about use case number 1 here. We are just making use of OAuth to identify a user. We are not going to use OAuth to try to make actions on behalf of a user and try to access Google services. Now, on that note, on that number 2 right there, very common question that I get is how do you use OAuth to do that? How do you actually use this OAuth flow to make actions or requests over to Google on behalf of a user? Well, just so you know, as a quick side topic here, every time that you go through a OAuth flow, it's eventually going to say something like, hey, this app wants to know your email, access your profile. Maybe it will also say, read your browser history or access all of your emails or whatever else it might be. The list of things that an app wants to do is known as its list of scopes. A scope is essentially a permission that you are granting to an application. Now with Google in particular, you can get a list of all valid scopes at this address right here. Now, keep in mind, Google very frequently changes their URLs, so by the time you watch this video, this link right here might be broken. If that link is broken, you can always do a very simple Google search for something like Google OAuth, I don't know, scope list, or something like that. And you should see something like this right here, OAuth 2.0 scopes for Google APIs. So on this page is a list of all the different scopes that you can ask for. And each of these different scopes are going to give you access to a different portion of the user's account. Now, in our case, the only thing that you and I really care about is probably going to be like a user's email, just so we can confirm that they are who they say they are and that we have some piece of information to tie to a user. So in our application, we are probably going to ask for a scope of email. Somewhere inside of here we go. So here's the list of scopes for Google Sign-In. We can ask for a user's email or their profile very easily and get the emails or the user's email address or their basic profile info. So we would use a scope named profile or email to get access to those 2 pieces of information. If we had asked for a scope of something like, I don't know, how about this one right here? So googleapis.com/auth cloud platform, that would allow us to manage the user's data across all of Google Cloud Platform services or what have you. If we wanted to access their email, we would probably do a search on this page for Gmail, like this right here. And this is a list of scopes that we could ask for to get access to the user's email. So if we ask for this scope right here, then we would get the ability to read, compose, send, and permanently delete all email from Gmail. And one thing I want to make clear is that this scope right here is intended to be a string, like a string value that we are going to pass over to Google when we go through the OAuth flow. The scope, even though it looks like a URL, is not something that you're going to add into your address bar. We'll talk more about scopes later on, but like I said, this is a very common question that I get, so I just wanted to very quickly give you a heads up on how you would kind of get access to a user's account. All right, so back over here, quick diagram. Now, if you've ever gone through one of my other courses before, I have many courses that make use of Google OAuth. And just about every Google OAuth flow that I show in every single other course makes use of OAuth for servers. In this course, for the first time ever, so if you've gone through OAuth with me before, this time it's going to be a little bit different. So this is the first time I'm going to show you how to do OAuth for JavaScript browser apps, or some JavaScript code that is running inside the browser. And so there's a little difference between these 2 flows right here. Let's take a quick pause. When we come back to the next section, I'll describe the differences between the 2 and how it's going to affect how our application is set up. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.